new book for us. It's the next one in the Chronicles of Narnia series. It's called The Horse and His Boy. And if you know anything about Grandma, you know this is going to be one of her favorites because it has a horse in it. So I want you to start with, here's a picture. This picture shows Archenland and the desert. This is the beginning of the Chronicles of Narnia, the horse and his boy. How Shasta set out on his travels. This is the story of an adventure that happened in Narnia and colormen of the lands between, and in the golden age when Peter was the high king in Narnia and his brother and two sisters were king and queens under him. In those days, far south of the colormen, at a little creek of the sea, there lived a poor fisherman called Ashresh. And with him there lived a boy who called him father. The boy's name was Shasta. On most days, Ashworth went out in his boat to fish in the morning, and in the afternoon he harnessed his donkey and a cart. And he loaded the cart with fish and went a mile or so southward to a village to sell it. If it had sold well, he would come home with a moderately good temper and say nothing to Shasta. But if it had sold badly, he would find fault with him and perhaps beat him. There was always something to find fault for with Shasta, who had plenty of work to do, mending and washing the nets and cooking the supper and cleaning the cottage in which they both lived. Shasta was not at all interested in anything that lay south of his home because he had once or twice been to a village with Asherah, and he knew that there was nothing very interesting there. In the village, he only met other men who were just like his father, men with long, dirty robes and wooden shoes turned up at the toe and turbans on their heads and beards talking to one another very slowly about things that sounded dull. But he was very interested in everything that lay to the north because no one ever went that way, and he was never allowed to go there himself. When he was sitting out of doors, mending the nets and all alone, he would often look eagerly to the north. One could see nothing but a grassy slope running up the level of the ridge, and beyond that the sky, which perhaps might have a few birds in it. Sometimes, if Ashereth was there, Shasta would say, "Oh, my father, what is there beyond the hill?" And then, if the fisherman was in a bad temper, he would box Shasta's ears and tell him to attend to his work. Or if he was in a peaceable mood, he would say, "Oh, my son, do not allow your mind to be distracted by idle questions." For one of those poets has said, "Application to business is the root of prosperity, but those who ask questions that do not concern them are steering the ship of folly toward the rock of indigence." That means being poor. Shasta thought that beyond the hill there must be some delightful secret which his father wished to hide from him. In reality, however, the fisherman talked like this because he didn't know what lay to the north. Neither did he care. He never cared a lot because he had a very practical mind. One day, there came from the south a stranger who was unlike any man that Shasta had ever seen before. He rode upon a strong, dappled horse with flowing mane and tail, and stirrups and bridle were inlaid with silver. The spike of his helmet projected from the middle of his silken turban, and he wore a shirt of chainmail. By his side hung a curving scimitar, a round shield studded with bosses of brass hanging at his back, and his right hand grasped a lance. A scimitar is kind of a moon-shaped sword. His face was dark, but this did not surprise Shasta because all of the people of Colorman were like that. he is pictured. What did surprise him was that the man's beard, which was dyed crimson and curled and gleaming with scented oil, but Asherah knew by the gold and the stranger's bare arm that he was a Turkman or great lord. And he bowed, kneeling before him until his head and beard touched the earth and made signs to Shasta to kneel also. The stranger demanded hospitality for the night, which of course the fishermen dared not refuse. All the best they had was set before the Turkman for supper, and he didn't think much of it. And Shasta, as always, happened to be the fisherman's bad company, was given a hank of bread and turned out of the cottage. On these occasions, he usually slept with the donkey in its little thatched stable, but it was much too early to go to sleep yet, and Shasta, who had never learned that it is wrong to listen behind doors, sat down with his ear to the crack in the wooden wall of the cottage to hear what the grown-ups were talking about. You do such a thing. And what he heard, this is it. Now, O my host, said the Turkman, I have a mind to buy that boy of yours. Oh, my master, replied the fisherman, and Shasta knew by the wheedling tone and greedy look that he was probably coming into his face as he said it. What price could induce your servant, poor though he is, to sell into slavery the only child and his own flesh? He was not one of the poets said natural affection is stronger than soap, and offering more precious than carbuncles. It is even so, replied the guest dryly, but another poet has likewise said, he who attempts to deceive the judicious is already bearing his own back for the scourge. That means he's about to get whipped. Do not load your aged mouth with falsehoods. This boy is manifestly no son of yours, for your cheek is as dark as mine, and the boy is fair and white, like the accursed but beautiful barbarians who inhabit the remote north. How well it was said, answered the fisherman, that swords can be kept off with shields, but the eye of wisdom pierces through every defense. Know then, O my formidable guest, that because of my extreme poverty, I have never married and have no child. But in that year in which Tisroc, may he live forever, began his august and beneficent reign, on a night when the moon was full and it pleased the gods to deprive me of my sleep, therefore I arose from my bed in this hovel and went forth in the beach to refresh myself with looking upon water and moon and breathing the cool air. A hovel is a really poor house that's just dirty and not fun to be in, but it's better than being out in the cold. And presently I heard a noise of oars coming to me across the water, and then, as it were, a weak cry. And shortly after, the tide brought to the land a little boat within which there was nothing but a man lean with extreme hunger and thirst, who seemed to have died but a few moments before, for he was still warm, and an empty water skin and a child still living. Doubtless, said I, these unfortunates have escaped from the wreck of the great ship, but by the admirable designs of the gods, the elder has starved himself to keep the child alive and has perished in the sight of land. Accordingly, remembering how the gods never fail to reward those who befriend the destitute, and being moved by compassion, for your servant is a man of tender heart. Oh, leave out all those idle words in your own praise, interrupted the Turkman. It's enough to know that you took the child and have had 10 times the worth of his daily bread out of him in labor, as anyone can see. And now tell me once what price you will put on him, for I am withered with your liquidity. You yourself have wisely said, answered Ashereth, that the boy's labor has been to me of interminable value. It must be taken into account in fixing the price. For if I sell the boy, I shall undoubtedly either buy or hire another to do his work. I'll give you 15 crescents for him, said the Tarquin. 15, cried Ashereth in a voice that was something between whine and scream. 15? For the prop of my old age and the delight of my eye, do not mock my gray beard, Tarquin though you be. My price is 70. At this point, Shasta got up and tiptoed away. He had heard all he wanted, for he had Afkin often listened when the men in the village were haggling, and he knew how it was done. He was quite certain that Ashereth would sell him in the end for something much more than 15 crescents and much less than 70, but that he and the Tarquin would take hours to get to an agreement. You must not imagine that Shasta felt at all as you and I would feel, as if he had just overheard our parents talking about selling us for slaves. For one thing, his life was already little better than slavery. For all he knew, the lordly stranger on a great horse might be kinder to him than Ashereth. For another, the story about his own discovery in the boat had filled him with excitement and a sense of relief. He had often been uneasy because, try as he might, he had never been able to love the fisherman, and he knew that a boy ought to love his father, and now apparently there was no relation to Ashereth at all. That took a great weight off his mind. Why, I might be anyone, he thought. I might be the son of a Tarquin myself, or the son of a Tisroc, may he live forever, or of a god. He was standing out in the grassy place before the cottage when he thought these things. Twilight was coming on, and a pace of a star or two was already out. But the remains of the sunset could still be seen to the west. Not far away, the stranger's horse, loosely tied to an iron ring on the wall of the donkey stable, was grazing. Shasta strolled over and patted its neck. It went on, tearing up the grass, and took no notice of him. Then another thought came to Shasta's mind. I wonder what sort of man that Tarquin is, he said out loud. It would be splendid if he was kind. Some of the slaves in a great lord's house have next to nothing to do. They wear lovely clothes and eat meat every day. Perhaps he'd take me to the wars and I'd save his life in a battle, and then he'd let me free and adopt me as his son and give me a place in a palace and a chariot and a suit of armor. But then he might be horrid and cruel. He might send me to work in the fields in chains. Wish I knew. How can I know? I bet the horse knows. If only he could tell me. The horse had lifted his head. Shasta stroked his mouth and satin nose and said, I wish you could talk, old fellow. And then for a second, thought he was dreaming, for quite distinctly, though in a low voice, the horse said, but I can. Shasta stared into its great eyes, and his own grew almost big with astonishment. How did you ever learn to talk? He asked. Not so loud, replied the horse. Where I come from, nearly all the animals talk. Wherever is that? Said Shasta. Narnia, answered the horse. The happy land of Narnia. Narnia of the hierarchy of mountains and the thymy downs. Narnia of the many moons and rivers and plashing glens and mossy caverns and the deep forests ringing in the hammers of the dwarfs. Oh, the sweet air of Narnia. And Anhor's life there is better than 1,000 years, an hour's life there is better than 1,000 years in Coleman. And ended with a whiny sound that sounded like a sigh. How did you get here? Said Shasta. Kidnapped, said the horse, or stolen or captured, whichever you'd like to call it. I was only a foal at the time. My mother warned me not to range the southern slopes into the Archland and beyond, but I wouldn't listen and I wouldn't heed her. By the lion's mane, I have paid for it, for my folly. All of these years, I've been a slave to humans, hiding my true nature and pretending to be dumb and what weirless like a horse. Why didn't you tell them who you were? No such fool, that's why. If they'd once found out I could talk, they would have made a show of me at fairs and guarded me more carefully than ever. The last chance of escape would have been gone. And why? Began Shasta, but the horse interrupted him. Now look, he said. We mustn't waste time on idle questions. You want to know about my master, the Turkman Armandin. Armandin. Well, he's bad. Not too bad to me, for a war horse costs too much to be treated very badly, but you'd better be lying dead tonight than go to be a human slave in his house tomorrow. Then I'd better run away, said Shasta, turning very pale. Yes, you had, said the horse, but why not run away with me? Are you going to run away too, said Shasta. Yes, if you'll come with me, answered the horse. This is the chance for both of us. You see, if I run away without a rider, everyone will see me, who sees me will say, scary horse, and he be after me as quick as he can. With a rider, I have a chance to get through. That's where you can help me. On the other hand, you can't get very far away on those two silly legs of yours. What absurd legs humans have, without being overtaken. But on me, you can outdistance any other horse in this country. That's where I can help you. By the way, I suppose you know how to ride. Oh, yes, of course, said Shasta. At least I've ridden a donkey. Ridden a what? Retorted the horse with extreme contempt. At least that is what he meant. Actually, it came out more like sort of a neigh. Ridden a what? Talking to horses always sound more horsey than in accent than when they are angry. In other words, he continued, you can't ride. That's a drawback. I'll have to teach you as we go along. If you can ride, if you can't ride, you can fall. Can you fall? I suppose anyone can fall, said Shasta. I mean, can you fall and get up again without crying and mount again and fall again and yet not be afraid of falling? I'll try, said Shasta. Poor little beast, said the horse in a gentler tone. I forgot you're only a foal. Well, we'll make a fine rider of you in time. And now we mustn't start until those two are in the hut and asleep. Meanwhile, we can make our plans. My Tarkman is on his way to the north to a great city, to Tarkhan itself, which is the court of Tisroc. I say, put in Shasta in rather shocked voice, oughtn't you to say, may he live forever? Why, said the horse. I'm a free Narnian, and why should I talk? Slaves and fools talk. I don't want him to live forever. I know that he's not going to live forever, whether I want him to or not. And I can see you're not from the north too, from the free north too. You're from the free north too. No more of this, Southern jargon between you and me. And now, back to our plans. As I said, my human was on his way to way north to Tarkman. Does that mean we'd better go to the south? I think not, said the horse. You see, he thinks I'm dumb and witless, like his other horses. Now, if I really were, the moment I got loose, I'd go back home. That's what horses usually do. To my stable and paddock and back to this place which is 2 days' journey south. That's where he'll look for me. He'd never dream of my going north on my own. And anyway, he will probably think that someone at the last village who saw him ride through had followed us here and stolen me. Oh, hurrah, said Shasta. Then we'll go north. I've been longing to go north all of my life. Of course you have, said the horse. That's because of the hood that is in you. I am sure it's true. Northern stock, but not too loud. I should think they'd be asleep even now. I'd better creep back and see, suggested Shasta. That'd be a good idea, said the horse, but take care that you're not caught. It was a good deal darker now and very silent, except for the sound of waves on the beach. Then Shasta hardly noticed because he had been hearing it all day and night as long as he could remember. The cottage, as he approached it, showed no light. When he listened at the front, there was no noise. When he went round to the only window, he could hear, after a second or two, the familiar noise of the old fisherman's squeaky snore. It was funny to think that if all went well, he would never hear it again. Holding his breath and feeling a little bit scary, but much less scary than he was glad, but much less sorry than he was glad, Shasta glided away over the grass and went to the donkey stable. Groped along the place he knew where the key was hidden, opened the door, and found the horse's saddle and bridle, which had been locked up there for the night. He bent forward and kissed the donkey's nose. I'm sorry we can't take you, he said. There you are at last, said the horse when he got back to it. I was just beginning to wonder what had become of you. I was getting your things out of the stable, replied Shasta, and now you can tell me how to put them on. For the next few minutes, Shasta was at work, very cautiously and avoiding jiggling, while the horse said things like, get that girth a bit tighter, or you'll find a buckle lower down, or you'll need to shorten those stirrups a good bit. When all was finished, he said, now, we've got to go have reins for that look of the thing, but you won't be using them. Tie them to the saddle bow and very slack so that I can do what I like with my head. And remember, you are not to touch them. What are they for then? Said Shasta. Ordinarily, they're for directing me, replied the horse, but I intend to do all the directing on this journey. You'll please keep your hands to yourself. And there's another thing. I am not going to have you grabbing my mane. But I say, pleaded Shasta, if I'm not to hold on to the reins or your mane, what am I to hold on by? You'll hold on with your knees, said the horse, and that's the secret of good riding. Grip my body between your knees and as hard as you like. Sit straight up as a poker. Get your elbows in. And by the way, what did you do with those spurs? I put them on my heels, of course, said Shasta. I do know that much. Then you take them off and you put them in the saddlebag. We may be able to tell them when we get to Talman. Ready? Then, now, I think you can get up. Now, normally you would hold on to a horse by the reins or by the or by the hair on his neck, which is called his mane. Usually, you wouldn't guide them that way. And if so, you would do it very gently because it could hurt their mouth. And so the horse is saying he doesn't want that. But you hold on with your knees, which is what keeps you straight in the saddle, jerked off accidentally. So that's really important. Oh, you're a dreadful height, gasped Shasta after the first and unsuccessful attempt. I'm a horse, that's all, was the reply. Anyone would think I was a haystack from the way you're trying to climb me up. Well, there, that's better. Now, sit up and remember I told you about your knees. Funny to think of me, who has led cavalry charges and won races, having a potato sack like you in the middle of the saddle. However, off we go. It chuckled, but not unkindly. And it certainly began the night's journey with great caution. First of all, it went just south of the fisherman's cottage to a little river which ran into the sea, and took care to leave in the mud some very plain hoof marks pointing south. But as soon as they were in the middle of the pond, it turned upstream and waited until they were about 100 yards further inland than the cottage. Then it selected a nice gravelly bit of bank, which it would take no footprints, and came out on the northern side. Then, still walking at a pace, went northward until the cottage and one tree and the donkey stable and the creek, everything, in fact, that Shasta had ever known, sunk out of sight in the gray summer night darkness. They had been going uphill, and now they were at the top of the ridge, and the ridge, which had always been the boundary that Shasta had known, his world. He could not see what lay ahead, except that it was all open and grassy. It looked endless, wild, lonely, and free. I say, observed the horse, what a place for a gallop, eh? Don't let's, said Shasta. Not yet. I don't know how to. Please, horse, I don't know your name. Beachy, biny, biny, booey, boss, said the horse. I'll never be able to say that, said Shasta. Can I call you Brew? Or Bree? Well, if it's the best you can do. I suppose you must, said the horse. And what shall I call you? I'm called Shasta. Said Bree. Well, now there's a name really hard to pronounce, but now about that gallop. It's a good deal easier than trotting if you only knew because you don't have to rise and fall. Grip with your knees and keep your eyes straight ahead between my ears. Don't look at the ground. If you think you're going to fall, just grip harder and sit up straighter. Ready? Now, for Narnia and the North. And that is the end